right, welcome to Truthzilla.
Woo! All right.
I'm Ed, and I have my co-host here, the lovely Megan, and the wonderful Scott on my other side here. And we have a very special guest tonight, Ricky Varandas of The Ripple Effect. Man, thank you for coming, Ricky.
Hi, Ricky.
We're honored.
Hey, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Dude, this is awesome, man. Like, I've been following you for a long time, honestly.
Heck yeah.
Some of my favorite things, like on your RV36 YouTube channel, your documentary list. He's got a playlist of all these documentaries, man. I've been going back and forth to that for a long time. Like, if I ever need some truth bombs, dude. So, literally always has like the most prestigious authors, journalists, documentary filmmakers, researchers in the business, man. And it's just like, it's kind of surreal. So I'm really honored to have you here. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
I was curious about how people woke up. Like, what was it that kind of was the catalyst that made you kind of be like, wait a minute, something's maybe not right here, and started looking into things for yourself?
Well, a lot of those documentaries you probably watched were some of the influences. It's funny because it's a question I'm always super curious about too. Is like, what was the red pill moment?
Yeah.
One thing I think that we find is that it might not necessarily be one thing that led to it. Myself, for example, I think I was always super curious and I was always really intrigued with, just asking questions and going against the grain and just trying to figure things out. But 9/11, I think, was definitely the moment for a lot of us, and I think later in time, maybe the younger people listening, it might be Epstein, it might be, I know a lot of people have gone into alternative media because the Q thing and whatever it may be. I think sometimes it's baby steps, right? Like I tell people all the time that sometimes it's really easy to avoid conflict because they're bringing something up that you know is incorrect, and you're like, okay, it might be vaccines, it might be 9/11, it might be whatever it may be, and these are controversial issues and topics that it's hard to have discussions about those things without it leading to an argument. But if you don't have those discussions, we're kind of just letting propaganda run wild and really run its course. So it's hard. I had this conversation with Derek Brose, who writes for The Last American Vagabond, and we talked about how like it's you have this internal dilemma because I don't like conflict, but the only I guess instinct that's stronger than that is having to say something. I can't just let a conversation be had and know that they might be spreading false information or a lot of times it's hard to blame them because they were tricked. And I'm sure if you listen to podcasts long enough, you've heard me say it's easier to trick somebody than convince them they've been tricked.
Absolutely.
And I think it's really hard to get somebody to snap out of that. And when somebody tells you that your worldview isn't what you've been told, your first reaction is like, no way. Like, you want to resist. You don't want to believe that you've been lied to or you've kind of, the way you see the world is an illusion. And so I think a lot of us are like that. I remember the first time I started really going down the rabbit holes and Alex Jones, even though a lot of people have this love-hate relationship with his work, because I think in some cases it can do some harm because he connects maybe dots that aren't as close as we would like them to be.
Sure.
But for many of us, he was really one of those first alternative media websites and people that really open our eyes to a lot of different things, and we're asking questions that you're like, that doesn't seem to make sense, and that doesn't seem to make sense. So, I think a lot of what he said and a lot of what he's done for the movement has been some good, because even though he has gotten some shit for some things that are completely over the top, but even the stuff that's over the top, there's a little bit of truth there that leads him to kind of, I guess, blow it out of proportion, and he might blow it out of proportion, but it might lead you to search, do some research, and maybe some new rabbit holes. So I think, it really was. It was documentaries. I was obsessed with documentaries. Yep. It was a great way of me learning. Eventually podcasts became my new obsession. I got obsessed with just like, just this casual conversation and people sharing ideas, and it seemed like to be one of the best spots where you could hear people like ourselves just talking and sharing ideas. And when you're listening to the media, when you're watching TV, you're constantly getting people that seem like they have an agenda or they're trying to sell you something. And documentaries and podcasts were documentaries first and then podcasts later seemed like the only spot where I was really getting alternative perspectives, real alternative perspectives. And I guess the idea of having an agenda, we all kind of have an agenda, right? Like we all have a perspective, or we have, even if it's just spreading truth, like that could be considered a agenda.
For sure.
We just have to like constantly reanalyze, like, okay, even though I think this is correct at this moment in time, I have to be open to new ideas and new perspectives. And, I just had Dennis McKenna on for the second time, and we don't necessarily agree on the COVID-19 thing, because he's more of like a classic liberal and a hippie, because for people who don't know who he is, his brother Terrence McKenna was very popular in the hippie movement and the LSD and all this stuff. So I think his natural reaction is to hate Trump and everything that he stands for and everything that he says. So I think his first reaction is, well, if he's saying that the lockdown, or we should start opening the country up or whatever, I don't like him, so I'm going to assume he's just ignoring science or whatnot. But we had a really fun discussion. I did the same thing with Scott Horton when I had him on.
Yeah.
We didn't agree on the COVID-19 thing, but we showed that we could have a honest discussion about it. And as long as you don't get defensive and whatnot, we can share reasons and perspectives on why we have certain ideas. And I think we need more of that. We need more of that. Even in the alternative media, people will. They like to pretend that, like, oh, I'm not on a team, I'm just looking at the facts. But then you join for example, 9/11, right? How did the towers come down? There's about 1,000 different opinions on how they came down. And they join those tribes, and what happens is you end up getting all this infighting, and then you're kind of, instead of wasting your energy exposing the real criminals, we end up spending a lot of energy fighting among ourselves. And you see it on Twitter, you see it on YouTube, where people are doing that. So I think even in the alternative media world, and as podcasters, I'm sure you probably already have noticed this, like having these discussions and having long-form conversations, you're growing in the process and you're learning in the process. Because even when people ask you to state your opinion on something, there's a lot of times that once you start saying it out loud, or you try to organize your thoughts, you realize, like, okay, maybe I haven't thought this out that well.
Yeah.
Or when somebody pushes back a little bit, sometimes you find out, like, oh, okay, maybe I'm wrong on this. So it's so important to whatever, as truthers or people in alternative media or truth seekers, whatever that is, whatever we think truth is, we have to be able to reevaluate, like, where we stand, where our opinions are, find the roots of our ideas, and be willing to reshape them as new information comes. So, I mean, that's the beautiful thing about podcasts. These conversations, it's not just a journey for the listeners, but it's a journey for the guests, for the host. Like, everybody gets something out of these things. So obviously, you know why I'm good at podcasting, or I got into it because I go on these long rants, and I already forgot your question.
That's perfect.
We like to rant as well.
Yeah.
We do. I mean, that kind of leads to the next question. It's like, so what was it then that made you want to start a podcast? Was somebody kind of suggested to you, or did you just kind of emulate the people that you were looking up to, the people that you were listening to?
Well, I always loved the long-form conversations. Even if I was at a pub with my friends, or if I was smoking a cigar, I love just sitting down and just sharing ideas and challenging ideas. And if you're with people you're comfortable with, it's fun because you can actually challenge each other's ideas without anybody getting defensive or too upset. And even if you do get upset in the moment, you get over it. But you need that type of atmosphere where you're willing to let somebody challenge your ideas, and you can challenge their ideas. And I feel like I grow so much during those conversations. So when I got into podcasts, and I was doing a lot of commuting for work, and I still do a decent amount of commuting for work, and I'm in the car, and it's like, or in the truck, and I can listen to the same music over and over again and gain very little from it.
Yeah.
And then, or I can listen to a podcast and learn something, listen to something that's thought-provoking, listen to a historian's perspective on some historical event, whatever it may be, but listen to something that really I could get something out of. And I'm sure a lot of you guys probably have the same experiences when you really got deep into podcasts and found ones that you loved. You'd get to a destination, and you're like, I really should be getting out of my car right now, but I don't want to turn it off. Even though you can, and you could listen to it, when you get, but you're like, oh, I'm so deep into this conversation that I want to see where it's leading. And so I was also a musician, so I had Pro Tools. I was kind of familiar with some audio recording and whatnot. I'm not like the most tech savvy person in the world, but I basically, was average in just understanding how to record audio and edit it. So I'm just like, I already have the equipment. I had a co-host, which it got kind of hard to kind of schedule things as time went by. But I had a co-host that I really enjoyed having conversations with. He was a little older than me, and he's like, what the fuck are we going to be doing? I'm like, we're going to be doing the same thing we always do, have our, like, conversations that, our deep conversations, or just have a casual conversation that eventually, hopefully, will lead to those deeper conversations, and we're going to record and put it out there. And he's like, who the fuck's going to want to listen to that? And I'm like, I'm like the same way. And I remember explaining to him, I'm like, this was my co-host when I started the show, Dave. I'm like, listen, I'm like, the same way we get something out of these conversations, the listeners also get something out of these conversations. And you don't have to be a person with a resume or somebody who has, like, a best-selling author or whatever, to have some interesting and fascinating opinions, and to me, that was the thing that I found more and more of, was like, some of my most interesting conversations with guests were people that, like, weren't the most famous or weren't the most, but they were just so fascinating. Yeah. And I was just an average Joe, and I'm like, what do I have to offer? And I'm like, well, I'm sure this person probably feels the same way. And next thing you know, we're having this really fun conversation that listeners are giving me positive feedback on, and even conversations with my co-host. I remember after I started having more and more guests on, he's like, well, who the fuck's going to want to listen to just shows with me and you? And I'm like, I think people actually get something out of these conversations. And I remember sending him, like, download numbers and positive feedback. I'm like, see, people actually want to hear us. It doesn't matter who's saying it. It doesn't matter who the guests or the hosts are. I'm like, what matters is the substance in the conversation. And if it's people being honest and sincere, and the listeners get that feeling from the conversation that it's just honest, sincere people just talking about life experiences. I mean, sometimes the podcasts I love the most are ones that aren't just like information. You have people like Corbett, you have people like Whitney, Webb. When you have them on, I mean, they're like the black belts of alternative media, the gold standards.
We talk about them all the time, for sure.
And they bring so much information. But sometimes, as a host or a listener or a guest, just the conversations about personal perspectives or life experiences, things that you would think, like, really aren't that interesting, or you don't really put up to the same level as, like, a information-filled podcast you would have with, like, a researcher. Those are the ones that resonate the most with listeners, because they can relate to it, and they can, they love the podcast full of information, but they also love the ones that they can relate to, and they get something that can help them in their own personal perspectives or soul searching or life. So it's to me, all these conversations are important. I had Jay Dyer on not too long ago, and it's funny. Did you listen to that one?
Yes.
He at the end of the show, I think we were still recording, where he talked about, he's like, oh, I'm so glad you didn't just ask me the typical questions about Hollywood and this and that, because he kind of gets sick of talking about that stuff. So I mean, I don't even know what we talked about. We talked about a lot of personal opinions and philosophies and stuff like that. So I think sometimes for the guest and the listener, it's nice to have these casual conversations where you don't force yourself into a specific topic. You kind of go anywhere it goes, and I think sometimes it goes down some really interesting roads that you would never think it would go, but it's because you let it go down that road, and you didn't force the conversation in any specific path. And sometimes, like I said, it's fun to have somebody like James Corbett, or I just had Douglas Valentine on, or whoever. It's nice to, like, extract as much information out of them as possible, because they can, they're just, there's so many things they could talk about, and so they go so deep into their research, and they're so well researched that it's fun to kind of extract that too. So it's a little bit of everything. I already forgot the question, but
it's all right. Just what got you into it.
I'm gonna be doing a lot.
That's awesome. It's awesome.
So what about this Union of the Unwanted, the new podcasting you guys got going on? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
For our listeners, because I'm way into that, dude. I could love that. But let our listeners know all about that. Yeah,
I've been getting, a lot of people have been giving me wicked positive feedback. Now I sound like I'm from Massachusetts. I said wicked. But so I've been getting a lot of really good feedback, and people have been loving it. And it's a similar thing where it's like a casual thing. And I keep telling everybody that's participating, I'm telling them in emails, I'm like, listen, it's casual. We're not talking about anything specific. I'm like, I want people to feel comfortable. I want people to just kind of talk, whatever's on your mind, discuss it, and get people from so many different perspectives and different websites and YouTube channels and whatnot. So it started off as Charlie Robinson, who wrote Octopus of Global Control, who also has a podcast. And Macroaggressions, and now he hosts of Macroaggressions on the iconic website for which is David Icke's website, and then Sam Tripoli from the Tinfoil Hat podcast, and Midnight Mike from the OBDM podcast. We all kind of got pretty close. We've done a lot of shows together. We talked a lot off air, and then we would start doing like these swap casts, and it was. Anytime I had an idea, I'm like, hey, I want to do another swap cast, and I'm like, oh, I know Charlie's always down, I know Sam's always down, I know Mike's always down. So it just happened to be like us four. And then we one of our episodes, we're talking about censorship, and that became like a big focus. And Mike's really tech savvy, and he really is always keeping up with like new apps and new ways of kind of bypassing the system and deal with censorship or whatnot. So during this conversation about censorship, Mike brings up. He just says, he's like, we should start this Union of the Unwanted or something, because we're talking about how like all of our shows and YouTube channels and whatnot, like we all seem to be unwanted by the mainstream YouTube and Google or whatnot. So he's like, let's start like a Union of the Unwanted. Okay, if you don't want us, then we'll go somewhere where we are wanted, and we'll gather together. And then we came up with this idea of like, well, you know what, censorship is such an important issue because these rabbit holes that red pilled us, for lack of a better term, or helped us mold our perspectives, like that only works if we have access to those researchers and those alternative perspectives in those documentaries and podcasts or whatnot. So now with censorship, like you can't even use Google to research anymore. I mean, you use Google and you're looking for anything that's outside of mainstream media. It's impossible to find. I mean, DuckDuckGo's a little better. Same thing with YouTube. Like back in the day, YouTube was an awesome spot to go down rabbit holes because while you're watching something, you'd be suggested some other documentary, and you're like, oh, let me check this out, let me check that out. So now it's gotten harder and harder to do research, and so we need something, some alternative, somewhere where people can get alternative media. And so Mike is actually working on a DLive channel called the Union of the Unwanted, where he's going to take a bunch of alternative media. It's going to be, hopefully the goal is to make it like a 24/7 channel that you can just tune in, and they're just constantly be showing podcasts and shows people in the alternative media world. And then also we're kind of messing around with the idea of like getting an algorithm that suggests alternative media too, like maybe an app or maybe a search engine, something, because you kind of need that, right? Because so eventually, I'm getting ahead of myself. So eventually we end up deciding, like, let's get a bunch of people from the alternative media world. Let's gather. Let's discuss, like, what issues we've been having, possible solutions, all this stuff. So we had, like, Ben Swan, Luke from We Are Change, Jason Burmis, James Corbett, all these people on. I don't even know how. Red Pill. We had so many different people on, and we were kind of talking about possible solutions and all this stuff. And one concern you could see where people didn't want to, like, join a cult, right? I guess I'm kind of sarcastically saying that. Like, say, hey, let's all go to one platform and then, put all our stuff there. Because what ends up happening is you shut down that platform, we're all screwed again. Yeah. So, the idea is to kind of everybody have their own website, but yet have a place where, you can be suggested people's websites and podcasts or whatnot. So that was kind of, James Corbett he seemed like he had a concern a little bit about, he's like, well, I don't want to, the whole point about YouTube or the internet, the beautiful thing is everybody can kind of have their own spot. Nobody has to come together. And it is, I mean, it's great, but people also have to find a way to be exposed to your stuff, and that's not happening. So
because as we know, people are unwilling to do the research for themselves, right? Like for the most part, like it's really hard to push someone in that direction until they take the red pill, and then it's game on. But yes, exactly, to have some sort of way to aggregate that stuff and have it fed in a little more accessible way, absolutely,
Yeah. So that's kind of, so it started off as basically just trying to create a Zoom conference call to fight censorship. And then it led to like, well, I really like gathering a bunch of people and then chit-chatting and then kind of hanging out. So I'm like, let's just kind of continue doing it. So we end up doing like, I don't know, I think 4, maybe 5 of them we've done. And we're planning on doing it every other Monday. So we did one this last Monday, and I think the next one will be on the 3rd, I believe.
Cool.
Yeah, I believe the next one will be something like that. Yeah, the 3rd. So the next one will be on the 3rd, and we're gonna do just basically every other Monday. What we call the Union of Unwanted. We'll throw out a bunch of invites to a bunch of people that we like and we're fans of. We told all the people who participate, like, hey, you can drop in at any time.
Yep.
You don't. You can show up for 5 minutes. You can show up for 2 hours. Do whatever you want. So it's kind of like a surprise to us who are hosting it, like who's going to show up, and it's also a surprise to the listeners, like who knows? James Corbett might show up for a little bit, Whitney Webb, Jason Burmis, Jeffrey Wilson from Conspiracy Farm, and it's just like a bunch of. So it's fun, and then we get everybody's perspectives. Everybody might be researching different things, and might have different things on their mind on what they want to discuss, and just do that. So it's going to kind of be like its own thing, like its own show, and it's kind of growing into its own thing. But it's tons of fun. I really enjoy it, and I like just bringing people on. I mean, maybe one night. I know your work schedules are kind of crazy. Maybe one night I'll see if we can get you guys on.
Hell yeah.
And just join in and the cool thing, it's become like a networking thing too, where a lot of people who've been on these shows, I'm noticing afterwards, like, oh shit, like they just got together, or they just got together. I'm like, and they met on the show, So it's fun, because the thing is, like, the one thing I love about the podcast world is how supportive everybody is of one another. Like, we're not competing, and like. Maybe some of it has to do with the fact that a lot of us aren't making any money doing this either. So what are we competing for? But the other thing too is, like, we all help each other out. Like, there's plenty of listeners out there, and I think there's plenty of people who are fascinated with truth-seeking and alternative history and alternative perspectives that, it doesn't have to be just one show. It can be tons of shows, So you see it all the time where people are willing to help each other out. I have tons of people contact me in regards to starting podcasts. And I'm always like, start it. I'm like, I'll help you any way I can, and you'll see, like, and I'm sure you probably already have seen where you contact people and people are super nice, and everybody's willing to help. So I think that's an awesome thing about the alternative media world, and it can only benefit us all, right? We're all going to grow together, and we all learn from each other too. Because I think you might listen to different podcasts that I don't listen to. You might go to different websites for your news that I don't. So you might bring something to the table that I've never even looked into, so everybody can kind of help seek truth. And like I said, truth is different for everybody, and we're always, like, just taking in new information. And like I've said on my podcast a bunch of times, so I apologize for anybody who's heard it, but, I think life is a giant puzzle. And as you gather more information and you learn more and you self-reflect and you figure things out, and it's one more piece of that puzzle. And at the end of your journey, when you get to the finish line, you might not have enough pieces to see the image clearly and know what that image is, but you have a better understanding of what that image could be. And that's kind of the goal. The goal is just like, let me constantly gather information that helps me better understand myself and the world around me, and just constantly keep doing that. And it is always weird when you meet people who don't have any passion or desire to do that. They're like okay with just being ignorant, or ignorance is bliss. Like, I'd rather, and there are people like that. And in a way, I kind of feel bad for them, but I also understand them, because how do you tell them, like, hey, the world's run by child trafficking pedophiles? It's like, they're like, hey, I just I just want to go I just want to go to a home and cut the grass and play with my kids. I don't want to it can't get dark.
You have to understand. Yes, interdimensional shape-shifting reptilians, dude. Come on. Yeah. Anyway, dude, that's awesome, man. Thank you. Dude, so I think maybe just switching gears a little bit. So we're out in Oregon, right? So we are like ground zero for a lot of craziness going on right now.
It's been wild. Are you guys near any of the protests or any of the wild craziness at the moment?
So we're in Eugene, about 2 hours south of Portland. Yeah. So pretty much, you have all the rioting up in Portland, but there was little bits and pieces of it here in Eugene. We didn't really see a whole lot. Some stores got damaged and stuff. Yeah. But it's definitely in the air. It's definitely in the air. We've got our governor, just again today, like saying that now kids as young as 5 are going to be required to wear masks out in public, and it's frustrating.
It was 12 last week. 12. If they're 12 and up, they didn't have to. Or
12 and under.
12 and under, they didn't have to wear masks. They just switched it to 5. I have a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old, so my daughter's going to turn 5 in September. So And I've made that decision. My kids are not wearing masks, so I'm like,
Yeah.
Dude,
fuck
I'm
that.
with you.
Yeah.
My kids are almost the same age. My son's 5, my daughter's turning 4 in August, and same thing. In Massachusetts, they said it. 2nd grade and up, you have to wear masks in school. Before they announced this, I told my wife, I'm like, listen, if our kids have to wear masks, they're not going to school.
Yep.
I'm like, we're homeschooling. I'm like, they're not. I mean, it's so ridiculous. And not just that, there's actual health issues
sure.
with the lack of oxygen. I mean,
Yeah.
so the last American Vagabond, and a bunch of people have reported this also about like they showed a little video of like a meter that you can use and you'd be like, okay, so OSHA uses it in case you report your employer as having like maybe an unsafe working environment, or you think the oxygen levels are low or whatnot. And if you use this meter, normal, and just use it normally, it has average readings, and then you put it under the mask, and all of a sudden it starts beeping and tells you like, hey, like you're in a unhealthy, unsafe environment. So there's people who are like that, walking around. I mean, they're driving like that,
Yeah.
and then never mind that, like on the mask it says on the box that it does not prevent coronavirus.
Yeah.
So it's like everything has become a political debate where it's not about if the masks work or don't work, or if there's false positives, or the fact that some people are actually registering or getting in line to get tested, decide that they or miss their appointment or get out of line or whatever, and then next thing you know they get positive results in the mail. Hey, you tested positive. They're like, well, that's funny because I didn't even get tested. And that's happening more and more. So much that even the governor of Florida mentioned it in his last press conference. He said it's something that he's heard so much about that he should that he wants to look into it. So this has gone to the point where it's like it's not like we're only hearing this on Alex Jones.
Right.
It's
CDC
actually
is saying it.
something that somebody is saying during a press conference. So it's like this whole mask thing, just like every issue,
piece of
has
this.
become a political thing where it's not about what's right or what's wrong or what the facts say. It's about what does my team stand for. And if my team stands for masks, then that's what I'm doing. I'm standing for masks. And if my team doesn't stand for masks, then that's what I'm doing. It's like I don't care what team says what. Like I just want to know the truth, and I just want to know what's going on. And if it happens that in this case, I, maybe happen to agree with a Republican or the Republican side or the conservatives more than I do with the liberals, then that's okay. Like I don't care. It's about but that's not the case. Everything's a political thing. I've seen people in my gym recently arguing about race. It's divide and conquer. It's like get us all infighting, getting us all arguing amongst one another. Where the ones who are pulling the strings, the ones who really have influence on our lives, could care less. They could care less about ideologies. They could get the only thing that matters to them is power and money.
Yep.
Even to the point where it's like they have so much wealth and money that it no longer becomes about that. It's strictly about control.
Yeah.
And that's what we're seeing here.
Keeping that power, control,
maintaining
maintaining it, setting it up for future generations.
Yeah.
No, but and I think something you said earlier, just about letting the new information alter your opinion going forward. Like we've been covering COVID constantly. I know everybody's getting COVID fatigue. I listen to the High Wire a lot with Del Bigtree. A lot of they have doctors and epidemiologists and scientists every week covering this issue. This week they had Dr. Andrew Kaufman, and he brought up something that. This is something that David Icke has been saying this whole time, but that there isn't a virus at all. And he brings it up to the point that it's never been isolated. And he went through all the science behind it that they never finished isolating the virus. And to me, it kind of made some things fit a little bit better. And, I'm not going to lock myself in, but it sure does make a lot of sense, is what I would say. What do you think about that?
Well, on the CDC website itself, it says that the test does not know for sure if it's testing you obviously tests even if it tests positive. I mean, there's all the issues with like the false positives and tests. Did you hear about the ship? The ship that had fishermen, they all test positive or negative when they went to sea. They came back 35 days later. They all test positive afterwards. So they were negative when they went to sea. 35 days later, they all test positive afterwards. So obviously the tests are flawed.
And the goat and the fruit in
if you read
Tanzania.
the CDC themselves say on their website that they are not sure which coronavirus you're testing positive for.
Yeah.
Sure.
But that they don't know specifically. So it could be the one that causes COVID-19, or it could be just one of the many coronaviruses in the coronavirus family.
Yeah.
But this is the thing is, regardless if you agree with a doctor or not, I mean, one thing we know, like, people will just pick a doctor and say, hey, but this doctor said this. It's like, well, if I have a health issue, how many people get a second opinion? What does that tell you? You go to many different doctors sometimes. That means that it's normal for doctors not to agree with one another, because all they're doing is analyzing information. Okay, they're analyzing information and they might come to a different conclusion, and that's what happens in the medical world all the time. So the idea, when I hear this theory that the virus doesn't exist, I'm like, you know what? It kind of I'm with you. I'm like, I definitely will entertain it, and it kind of makes sense because they haven't proven that they have 6 different tests. They haven't proven that any of them work. None of them are 100%. I mean, they all give false positives or false negatives. I mean, and so it's like, and we're not even sure what exactly they're testing for. Yeah. So we haven't even found out if it came from the lab, the Wuhan lab. But one thing we do know for sure is that they're hiding something, because you want to talk about censorship. Del Bigtree was on my show. He was on Grime America's show. He was on a bunch of different shows, and everybody just magically had issues with those episodes. Mm-hmm. When my show with Del Bigtree came out, all of a sudden I started getting listeners asking me, like, hey, what's going on with your show? It doesn't work on iTunes. And I'm like, oh, that's funny, because every time Del Bigtree's on any podcast, it doesn't work on iTunes. So it's not coincidental. And of course they give you some type of BS explanation, like, oh, we're having some problems with this or that, we'll fix it, Wow. And they did eventually end up fixing it. But my point is, like, when they're censoring the pandemic documentary, so you can't watch it, but you can watch it as long as somebody is calling it a hoax and debunking it. Yeah. So you can literally watch the documentary in full on YouTube as long as somebody's calling it a hoax and somebody's debunking it. And that's by design, because if they're using algorithms that and they were using some really complex algorithms that just pull these people who were uploading it as quickly as you could upload it. They were being pulled down. I mean, even the documentary's website, which you pay for a domain name, you could put anything you want on that website. That was pulled. Dr. Judy's her Wikipedia page was locked. They changed it. They said that she was an anti-vaxxer, conspiracy theorist, and then they locked it. So it's like, well, this is the version that everybody's going to see. We're not going to let anybody edit it, complain about it, or do anything. So what happens? You research, this pandemic documentary, and that's what you're seeing. You're going to Wikipedia. The first thing you read is anti-vaxxer, conspiracy theorist. So to me, it's like, it's obvious that, like, okay, if you're going to, censor this perspective, like, then there's an issue with that, because you've decided what truth is, and you're saying my version of truth is the only truth you can see, and you're not intelligent enough to look at all the information and come up with your own conclusions, and that's a problem. Like, that's why censorship is one of the biggest issues ever, because it's like there's no such thing as people not having emotions or some type of biasness getting in the way of their thought process. Like, we all have, we have to constantly reflect and try to figure out, like, okay, why do I think this? Am I on the right side on this issue or with this issue or whatnot? And the thing is, when people say, hey, we're just getting rid of misinformation, that those aren't the facts, where it's like, well, according to who? And they do have, for example, the Wuhan lab getting money from the National Institute of Health, which Fauci was linked to, and all this stuff, and giving them millions of dollars. That article was pulled, or like anybody who's sharing that, it was like being censored. And then Swan comes out with a video showing that the person who's working for the fact checker that was working for Facebook, who was fact checking this article, worked at the lab. It's like at the Wuhan lab. It's like, how could it be any more obvious? It's like, that's the thing that was driving me nuts about all this. It's like, you can't watch the pandemic documentary, but in 24 hours, there's articles already debunking how can you watch a documentary, research all that stuff, and already write an article as quickly as the documentary went viral? I mean, it was obvious. It was like, it was a plan. Like, they were pushing this out. They wanted to. I mean, I would talk to people and they're like, oh, it's already been debunked. I'm like, what part of it? And you get into discussion, and it's like, yeah, you're going to find parts of it that you might not agree with. Guess what? I mean, loose change was a huge red pill in my life.
Yeah.
But guess what? I could probably go back, and Jason Burmis will say it himself. He'll go back. You can find parts of it you can disagree with or whatnot.
Yep.
But it doesn't mean like it should just be banned off the face of the earth. You know, like you
Absolutely.
can dissect any documentary or any researcher's work and find maybe
all
something you
information's
could
bad.
disagree with, or you feel like, okay, maybe that's not correct 100% or whatnot. But, you know, anytime you decide what truth is, it's a huge issue. If somebody wants to put out a documentary on flat Earth, if somebody wants to put a documentary on even something as controversial as
Space is
Holocaust
fake.
denying,
Space
right?
is fake.
I mean,
Holocaust
you
denial,
should
yeah.
have the right to do it. And then if the information, if it's backed by bullshit research, I should be able to watch it, come up with the conclusion that's bullshit research,
Let
and
people
there's you know
decide.
your opinion is based on nothing or false information. But you know, it's a slippery slope, right? If we decide, well, no, we have to have some restrictions, you know, and this is where it gets like really blurry, right? Because it's like, okay, well, should we draw some line somewhere? You know, it's like, should a Holocaust, like in Germany, you can't even talk about the Holocaust or deny it.
It's illegal,
And it's like,
yeah.
well, I see why. I mean, I can understand because we understand history, but like, okay, does it stop there, or does it now lead to, well, you also can't talk about that, and you can't talk about this?
Right.
So, and I'm not. I mean, I'm not a Holocaust denier by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm just using it as an example because it's one of those topics we all can kind of agree that, like, okay, that's kind of a silly stance, you know. But like, should they still have the right to say it? You know, should they still have the right to share their research? And guess what? And maybe in their research, you might find, and I think actually I did see like some documentary that talked about it, and there was some stuff in it that I'm like, oh shit, I actually didn't know that aspect of that historical event. You know, you could get something out of it. You know,
Yeah,
it might,
totally.
you know, and a lot of even the most ridiculous conspiracy theories, the reason they stay alive is because there is some truth to them.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
something there,
Sure.
and you'd be like, okay, maybe the whole theory isn't correct, but there is little seeds of truth that keep this alive that are interesting. You know, and
Totally.
so you know.
Yeah. So like we did this a couple weeks ago. We did an exploration into like the intelligence agencies and their connections with it. And you know what they call it? They call it information hygiene, is what they call it. So if you go to like InQtel's website, Tara O'Toole is heading up their COVID response team, which is called Be Next. And if you go down all the like that's how invested they are. They're invested billions of dollars into the intelligence side of this, and they have a Project Domino that's all about information hygiene, going on Twitter, going on Facebook, all social media, and they said just taking an aggressive stance towards misinformation, right? And it's like that's how entrenched they are in this, and that also just tells me how this is not going away anytime soon. You know, it's insane.
Event 201 was all about controlling the information.
And she was a part of Event 201 too.
Flooding the zone is the terms they use to like just throw so much information you can't make sense of the shit, and that's kind of where we're at, you know. Like we're kind of just grabbing at straws to find exactly what is real. Sometimes there's just so much coming at us, but
Yeah, that's a tactic among itself. I mean, there's a book and also a documentary called Merchants of Doubt, and it's about that. It's about, you know, like one of the tactics, and I don't necessarily agree. I mean, I believe it's about like global warming or whatnot, and like how some of the science in global, and I don't know where I stand on global warming, to be honest, because it's one of those things where like I'm constantly going back and forth.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, yeah, that seems like they're trying to sell you bullshit, but you know, I'm like, I don't know if that's true either. But but the point is, like, some of the tactics is give people so much information, even if you don't. The information doesn't have to be good or bad or really factual. Just overload them with like conflicting information that they just throw their hands up and are like, fuck, I don't know what to believe. So you know, that's, you know, and you just don't take a side, or you end up just picking a side based on emotions or whatever. So yeah, I mean that's you know, a difficult thing. Is just sometimes you can be overwhelmed with so much information, and you saw that during the lockdown. Like people were just stuck to their TV. And then, you know, I would have discussions with people who are like, well, I don't know, because this person said that and that person. And I'm like, they kind of win, because it's like, you're like, well, if you just said, hey, there's so much information that I don't know what to believe, then that's okay. But if it's a virus, now you're basically, you know, what was happening a lot was they're like, there's so much information, I don't know what to believe. So to be safe, I'm just going to wear a mask.
Yep,
I'm just going to
I've heard
stay
that one a
home.
lot.
And I'm going to, you know, and I've said this over and over again. Like, there's a risk to being alive and free people. I mean, if I decide to never drive again, ever in my life, I might save a life. You know, I might, or I might save my own life. You know, so there's a risk. I understand every time I drive, there's car accidents every day, and that I'm taking a risk, and that's the price I pay to be free and experience life and do the things I enjoy. And so this idea of like, oh, just stay home, you'll save a life. Well, yeah, but if you could make that argument about a lot of different
live
things.
your life though.
Right.
Yeah, dude,
What
totally.
was that? Sorry, I missed
You
it.
won't get to live your life then, though. You're missing out on life if you're just staying home all the
that's the
time.
thing.
You have to take the risks. Go enjoy yourself. I mean, it doesn't matter if the virus is worse than we think. Like, I would still rather live than like be huddled in my house waiting until the government tells me it's okay to go outside again. I think that's
And the thing is, once you give the government a little bit of power, they never give it back.
No.
That's it.
So
Totally.
you're seeing it now. Like I've heard people talk about stories of how police officers are using the COVID-19 contact tracing software that everybody magically got it downloaded on their phones. They're using that to track people for other reasons.
Of course they
So
are.
it's like,
Of course
you
they
know,
are.
people are like, oh, I found it on my phone, but it's not on. I'm like, well, if they can download it without you
Yeah.
knowing, you don't think
Yep.
they can turn it on without you knowing?
Yep.
So it's like, it gets scarier and scarier, and people, I mean, again, it was like flatten the curve. Then you flatten the curve. It's like, well, we didn't lock down long enough, so let's lock down a little longer. Now let's do this. Oh, now everybody should wear masks. It's like everybody keeps thinking that, oh, if we just did this like the government told us to, then this would all go away. It's like, no, it doesn't. Because then we were supposed to flatten the curve, and look what happened. Now everybody's wearing masks after we flatten the curve. So it's like it's never going to go away. They're just going to keep moving the goalposts, and so you have to fight back. I mean, I've told the story on my podcast about how a perfect example of how you fight back, how you can actually make a difference. And in Massachusetts, one of the first things that opened were golf courses, because a golf course in Boston or near Boston said, hey, we're sick of cutting grass and maintaining our fields for nothing because we don't know when we're going to open. Charlie Baker would just say, well, maybe it'll be in a couple weeks, maybe, so they send out an email. So they send an email to all their members, and they're like, hey, we're going to open up. I don't give a shit what the government says. I don't care what Charlie Baker said. We're opening up anyways on this day, this Friday, regardless. So Fox News picked up on this story, and they got interviewed. And because of the social pressure, Charlie Baker's like, okay, we'll let the golf courses open. So was it about safety? Or was it about PR? Was it about, so it showed that if it was really about safety, then you should have never let them win. You should have fought back regardless if you're Charlie Baker, So it's not about safety. None of this is about safety. I mean, the fact that people keep talking about numbers increasing, well, that's great, numbers increasing, but what's the point of talking about numbers if we haven't even created a test that specifically and works and specifically finds that coronavirus that supposedly we're looking for. So and then all the stories of respirators killing people, and the overuse of respirators, all the stories of people dying in car accidents and being considered a COVID death.
Yeah.
I mean, Dr. Birx, during a press conference, I'm like, people, this isn't a conspiracy theory. During a press conference, she said, we're being very liberal with our COVID death counts, that if you die with the virus or by the virus, they're basically counting it. So if you, and Dr. Scott Jensen, the senator, who was going around on a bunch of shows. I think he even talked to Del Bigtree about it, about how he got new CDC guidelines that said, hey, you know what, if somebody has the virus but they die by something else, like, hey, mark that down as a death. And death certificates are, like Dr. Scott Jensen said, death certificates are actually very important for them to be specific, very specific, because when you look at, like, funding for cancer research or whatever, like, that's based on how many cancer deaths you have. So those death certificates, what it says on those death certificates, will affect, like, the funding and these numbers and statistics that are used for tons of different things. So, it's obvious that, like, they were completely inflamed and they were just, these numbers were just blown up out of proportion. But people still say, well, look at the numbers. This many people died. And it's like, okay, I mean, in Italy, which was one of the hot spots in Europe, they said, like, 99% of people were old, 99% of people were in nursing homes. So it's like, why are kids wearing masks?
Yeah.
The flu actually kills young people. The flu kills young people. They kill a lot of fucking young people. And guess what? We never tested teachers for the flu during flu season. We're never like, hey, let's test these teachers because they're putting our kids at risk. Let's put masks on them, and let's do the correct steps to make sure they don't give our kid the flu and our kid ends up dying. And that's the other thing too. Is like now, if you give somebody a virus and they could possibly get it from you, you're a murderer. They're making it look like, how dare you spread virus? Like, we've been spreading viruses forever. Everybody's gotten
Viruses
sick at some
everywhere.
point. We've never said, hey, let me backtrack and see who the fuck gave me this cold.
Yeah.
I'm gonna really give them a piece of my mind for this runny nose. It's
totally.
it's so ridiculous. It's like now, but it's all about
pitting us
public
against
shaming.
each
You're
other.
turning people on each other. They're telling you like, hey, if people are getting together, if there's big groups of people together, like, let us know. I'm like, wait, I don't get it. I thought we didn't like China. We didn't like communist Russia and communist China, but yet we're okay with turning into them, like, because that's what happens. We all end up getting paranoid, and then you think Big Brother's everywhere because even your neighbor could be helping Big Brother turn you in, and that's the scariest thing. It's like that's why your podcast. Anybody who starts a podcast is so important. If you're spreading this information, and just, I shouldn't even say this information, because this information is going to constantly change. It's just, as we get more information, it might change. But just people who are open-minded, looking at things from all perspectives, it's so important. Because, you talked about my podcast and why I started my podcast. I mean, I started it, I called it a ripple effect because I named it after a song I wrote. And it's because I truly believe in this idea that we could all start a ripple. And the opposite thinking is the most dangerous thing ever, right? So what's the alternative of thinking we can all make a difference? It's thinking we can't make a difference and just letting things be the way they are.
Yeah.
And so that means people who are controlling things can control things with no resistance, nobody fighting back. So, I truly believe, and my show became a good example of it, because what happened was, like you guys, I just had a passion for conversation and truth-seeking. And little by little, I started getting bigger and bigger guests, and I started getting more and more attention. And next thing you know, some Portuguese immigrant who came to America and has a full-time job and barely graduated high school is talking to Jesse Ventura and Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, who was Chief of Staff to Colin Powell at the White House, and Jack Abramoff and Freeway Rick Ross. And I'm like, wait, you guys want to fucking talk to me? Like, who the fuck am I? I'm like, you want to talk geopolitics with me? I'm like, so it became a example. So when I first started the show, I pushed this idea, and then the podcast itself became an example that the idea actually is real, that it can happen. Now we can all start a ripple, and we don't know how big of a effect we're having. You guys do your show. You don't know who's listening. There could be somebody who could be a future politician, a future tech-savvy person who creates the next groundbreaking technology. Like, they could listen to your show and you could have effect on them. And the thing is, like, we know the people who are influential in the world, but rarely do we know the people who influence them. They're less known people. So it could be a less known book, a less known artist, a less known now we live in the world of podcasts where everybody's podcasting and listening to podcasts. It could be a less known podcast. It could be a huge influence on somebody who actually maybe is better known and really makes a huge life change. So to me, it's like we all can do something. And especially when you have kids, and prior to kids, I had this need to feel like I should do something fulfilling. Like, I wasn't okay with like just going to work, doing cutting the grass, paying the bills. There's obviously enjoyment in like being with your friends and family and life experiences, but I felt like there's something missing. And I think a lot of us podcasters, that's what motivates us. That's some of our desires. Like, I feel like I could do more, and if who knows what type of impact I'll have, but if one person listens and I have a positive impact on their lives, then to me it's worth doing.
Yeah, man. Well, I gotta say, you're meeting one right here, man. Like you definitely played a big part in me wanting to go down this road for sure, dude.
Yeah, and I would just say, like, too, just like my story, like how getting in here, like I was calling Scott when the pandemic started, like almost daily, just like, because the world around me is like fucking crazy. Like no one gets it, Like I'm relating to people I'm listening to on podcasts and like a very small group of people. So it's just like eventually it's like we need to do something. We need to talk out and like, make our voices heard, because I want to wake people up to this. It sucks living in a world where
Well, the crazy thing too is that I never had more listeners contact me than I did during the lockdown, and I think it's because of that. Because so many people who were like us needed a voice to prove to them that, like, hey, I'm not going fucking crazy. Other
Right.
people
No
can
shit.
see
Yeah.
this the way I could see it. You know, like we needed someone. So when people were listening to my show, and I was doing show after show over, on the coronavirus, I was on social media fighting with people. I shouldn't say fighting. I was sharing articles regardless if it meant like, hey, I'm going to probably waste a big chunk of my day just trying to rebut what people are saying.
That was my day today.
But I was
in
willing
response to the mask mandate.
But I had to do it because I'm like, I can't like just let people just spread false information, because there's a lot of people. So there's a lot of people out there. One thing I saw a lot of was I would share stuff and people would contact me and they're like, dude, I feel the same fucking way, but I'm just not saying it because everybody's going to jump on top of me,
Yeah.
or people are going to call me a Trump supporter, or
Yep.
people, you know, it's going to turn political or whatever. And so people were afraid of talking and kind of, you know, it's the same thing with the vaccine issue. It's one of those issues, topics that's really hard to bring up. 9/11, same thing, because like it's really hard to have a mild conversation, a very logical and calm conversation about those topics. Somebody usually gets emotional, somebody usually gets worked up. In some cases, it's me, but I only get worked up because I'm really passionate about these topics. I want people, and the thing is, I don't like pushing anybody in any direction. It's like, listen, I'm an idiot, but I hopefully can expose you to some really interesting people and interesting topics, and hopefully you can just relate to the fact that just like the listener or anybody who's listening to my show, I'm just a curious person like you are, and I'm open-minded and I'm sincere, and I truly don't know where I stand on so many different things, but I'm willing to explore them, and I think that's what we should be doing. But during the lockdown, so many people contacted me, and because I live in Massachusetts, which was one of the hot spots, right?
Yeah.
And they're like, hey, fucking, you know, people from the UK, people from Eastern Europe, Western Europe, Asia were contacting me. They're like, hey, things are fucking crazy in the U.S., huh? Especially Massachusetts. And I'm like, no, man, like everything's fine. I'm like, everybody's saying things are crazy, but I have friends that work at local hospitals. I mean, the closest city to us, and I live in Ludlow, Massachusetts, is Springfield, Massachusetts, and there's some pretty big hospitals there. There's two huge ones, Bay State and Mercy Hospital, and I have friends that worked at both of them, and I talk to both of them on a regular basis. I'm like, hey, am I wrong when I say that, like, you guys aren't busy? Because I don't want to go on the air and spread misinformation or disinformation or whatever. I don't want to be wrong. And I'm like, are things really, are our local hospitals as dead as all the other ones that I'm hearing about all over the U.S.? They're like, yeah, it's not busy. It's not busy. It's slower than normal. And you know, one thing that they also put in perspective when they were saying, you know, some hospitals are busy. They're like, during a bad flu season, like, hospitals can be busy. But who hasn't been to the ER and had to wait sometimes? Like, that's not uncommon to have to wait at the ER. Like, hospitals get busy sometimes, you know? So it was crazy how the news could keep telling you how bad this was, how crazy hospitals were, how the whole world is dying and ending and all this stuff, and nobody is experiencing it, or at least very few people are experiencing it, but we all just believe it's happening somewhere else, right? We're like, well, it's not crazy here, but it doesn't mean it couldn't be crazy over there. Like, so they're being honest, or it's crazy, and it's like, so you start talking to people. I talk to people from Portugal, I talk to people from the UK, and they're all like saying the same thing. They're like, no, everything's fine. I maybe know a friend of a friend who had it, but he's fine. He had mild symptoms and all this stuff. So it's like they just create this illusion of like everything being crazy and the world ending, and we're all panicking because of the unknown. And yet, like, you talk to people and like nobody was experiencing that. And what's crazy too is like CBS News. I'm sure you guys are aware of them using like Italy film from an Italian hospital. It's like, how come that wasn't flagged as false information? Why didn't they get banned off Facebook or Twitter or Instagram? Like, they're obviously misleading people. And there's example of that, of like mainstream media just scaring people. You know, they only talked about deaths and numbers because those were the big things. They didn't tell how many people recovered. They didn't tell you how many people were asymptomatic. They didn't tell you any of that stuff. And it's just like even when the story first started, or when the virus first started getting some media attention in the U.S., like the first 40, 50 cases, the deaths were all in not just in one state, in Washington State. It was in one nursing home in Washington State, and yet the news didn't tell you that information.
Yeah.
So I remember telling my wife, I'm like, listen, don't you think it's interesting that a very crucial part of this story is missing? The fact that they're saying that there's 50 deaths in the U.S. now, but they're not telling you it's in one nursing home in one state. I'm like, what does that tell you? That's telling you that the only information they want to share is information that continues scaring you. They don't want to give you that continues having people watch because it's like, oh shit, something big is happening or whatever. And they didn't tell you that like in Wuhan, they had direct flights from Wuhan to Ohio and other parts of the U.S. prior to the lockdown. So that means a lot of people who had like a really bad case of the flu early 2020 could have had it and could have been fine, and it could have been here already. So. They weren't telling you about vitamin C, zinc. They weren't telling you about oxychloroquine. Why? Because oxychloroquine's a generic cheap drug.
50
that's
cents pill.
pennies on the dollar. That people were. I heard this story recently. It was I think it was Joe Rogan who was talking about. It was Joe Rogan, Brendan Schaub, recently Brendan Schaub and Brian Callen got the virus, and I think it was Joe Rogan telling the story about either Brendan Schaub or Brian Callen going to the doctor. And you're like, hey, I tested positive. What do you, asking the doctor his opinion. And he's like, well, where do you politically stand? And he's like, well, I don't give a fuck. He's like, I don't care about politics. He's like, I just want to know what treatment I should use. And he's like, well,
shit.
oxychloroquine does work, and we've had success with it, but some people don't want to use it because Trump was promoting it. And I'm like,
God.
what the fuck? Like
That
everything
is
is
so
become political,
fucked up.
and doctors know. And the thing is, too, is like, could there be some side effects of oxychloroquine? Absolutely.
Well,
Is there
you
side
used it
effects
for
to just
70
about
years.
any drug ever made?
Yeah.
Yes. So, like, that's not unusual. Okay, you could find one case of somebody having a side effect. Great. There's many cases of people having side effects of vaccines. I don't see you marketing that.
Advil,
Some people like,
Tylenol.
hey,
People have
vaccines
adverse
can be
reactions to
unsafe.
Tylenol.
Yeah,
What?
totally.
I was just saying, like, people had adverse reactions to Advil, Tylenol, dude. But like, yeah, if it's political, if it's politicized at this point, that tells you right there, man. Like,
That's
it's just
crazy.
So
though.
frustrating.
That's crazy. Where do you stand politically?
Yeah.
Wow.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and that showed, and everything became political. I'm like, this isn't a political thing. This is a big pharma thing, okay?
Oh, completely.
Fauci was a part of coronavirus tests with oxychloroquine.
Yep.
He's been, he was a part, he's
Previous
linked
coronavirus.
to Gavi, and his wife works for a part of the government that helps get vaccines FDA approved. Like there's all these things. James Corbett goes into Bill Gates, in his documentary,
Yep.
which is phenomenal because
Definitely.
when I had James on, one thing we discussed was like I don't think James knew. I don't think anybody knew really went that deep into Bill Gates' history and influence. And nobody, I don't think, knew how much influence he had on everything. He
No
is
shit.
the Rockefeller
The
of
new
our
Rockefeller,
time.
yep.
Yep.
I don't think he's on the top of the pyramid, but Jesus, he has a lot of influence on a lot of different organizations. He has influence on BBC. He has influence on NPR. He has influence everywhere. And yet, if you guys talk about zinc or big pharma, whatever, they'll be like, yeah, but you're not a doctor. Well, neither is Bill Gates, and he's interviewed on
Yep.
every fucking show ever, talking about depopulation, talking about vaccines.
Yep.
It's crazy. And this goes to a deeper question. Like, when you have that much material wealth, he's like a multi-billionaire, okay? You've been to every exotic island. You've been to every, you bought every expensive car. You've experienced everything that material world can give you. What's next? It's power.
Power and
It's,
control.
it's, some addiction to having an influence on the world, or maybe forcing, because you have that type of influence and money, forcing your perspective on how the world should be onto the world.
Yes.
So, and this goes to the Epstein thing. Like, how many of these people who were caught up in the Epstein thing were people who were just, they're so, they've had every material thing, and they have this sick fetish that it's the next best thing because nothing else excites them anymore. I remember when Rogan had one of these really famous poker players on his podcast, the guy who always has the girls everywhere on his Instagram page, was it Dan
Can't remember.
something?
No, I don't know.
But anyways, he was on there, right? And like this whole somebody's like, oh, you should listen to it. It's fascinating. And I listened to it, and like it literally did nothing. No part of it was really that fascinating, except one part of the conversation that really kind of stuck with me because it made sense when relating it to all these other rich and powerful people. And he was talking about how like having as much money as he has, because he like his Instagram, he's constantly on exotic beaches and has beautiful women all over the place and on private jets and whatever. He's like, when you're poor, right, and when you get a Mustang, for example, you know, even if it's an old Mustang, your happiness level, you have like 1 to 10, like it reaches 10 because it's like the pinnacle of your life. Like, oh my God, I've always wanted this nice car, you know, and then like to get to 10 again, now it takes like a Corvette. Mm-hmm. Then it takes like a Ferrari. Yeah. Then it takes like a Bugatti. And then it gets to a point where just like, what does it take for you to get to that 10 again? Like, so when you've already had all the material things in the world, you've had all the excitement that you could possibly get with money, what's the next thing? Like, you need to get to there. You're an addict and you need to get your fix. And your fix might be doing something that is so sick, like, you know, child trafficking, yeah, or whatever it may be, or influencing the world in a negative way, but, you know, forcing your ideologies onto the world and molding the world as you want to see it. It could be all those things. And, you know, I've said this a bunch of times, how addiction to money and power is one of those addictions that we kind of look past. We don't take it seriously because most people who are addicted to money and power are people who are successful in the world. Because we've created a society where, like, if I'm addicted to money, that means, like, fuck my friends, fuck my family. Like, all I care about is, like, how do I get ahead? That means doing things that are morally wrong. That means spending all my time pursuing more money and more power and whatever. And then I become successful, and people are like, oh, look at this dude. He has a really nice house, and he has this nice car, and he's a CEO of this big company or whatever. But you have the same traits of a psychopath or a drug addict, right, and you can never get enough of it. And then one day, I think, and in some cases, they're going to look back at their lives and say, like, well, you know, I might have done some really fucked up things, and I burned bridges, and I don't like the person I am. And that's why I find it fascinating talking to people who are closer to the finish line of their lives, you know, people who are a little older and experience some life. And, you know, their perspective is really interesting because, you know, I think sometimes it takes that to kind of reflect and be like, okay, what should I have done with my life? You know, is life really about material wealth like corporations and marketing has told me? Or is it about life experiences? Is it about connecting with people? Is it, you know, my kids don't give a shit if I live in a multi-million-dollar house, if I live in a $100,000 house. Like, they just want to be around me, and they want to play, and they find enjoyment in that. Speaking of my kids, I hope my microphone's not picking up them playing upstairs because I can hear them dropping toys and stuff. But yeah, I mean, so I think that's, you know, that's a huge issue. It's like this. Is it what causes people to be Epstein, to be a Bill Gates? And, you know, it really is an addiction.
Absolutely, man. Yeah. Stay grateful, stay humble. I think that's the message there, to fight that off, right? And we're trying to do our best here while we're spreading the truth. Ricky, dude, man, I just really want to thank you for coming on today, man. This has just been a real honor. You maybe want to let our audience know how to find you?
Yeah. So I'm on Instagram, RV36. I mean, I besides, you see a lot of pictures of like my food and my kids on there, but nothing too thought-provoking some from time to time. But Twitter, RV36, YouTube, RV36. I'm also on that new platform, Parler. I've heard people pronounce it differently. I think it's a French word, so it's like pronounced Parler. But it's kind of like the unbiased, uncensored, supposedly Twitter. There is some, like, I mean, to get all conspiratorial, there is some talks about who really owns it and who funded it or whatever. Oh, wow. But for the time being, you know, it's I don't know if it's coincidental that they're getting a lot of people, right-wing people and Q people on there. It might be because all the other platforms are those are the people that they're censoring more, so that might be one of the reasons. But I've heard conversations about, like, it also could be because some of those people are funding it. But we'll wait and see. I mean, I think when you have this much censorship on these other platforms, then it opens a door for new platforms. You know, like you look at the Joe Rogan going to Spotify. You know, I think hopefully because there is a alternative, YouTube might be like, well, okay, now we got to pump the brakes a little bit. We can't just censor everybody, because before it was a monopoly. Like, if you leave YouTube, you're screwed. But now you can go to Spotify. So hopefully, you're seeing more of that, where like Parler is popping up because people are sick of the censorship on Twitter. So I'm on Parler at RV36. I know I'm so bad at these rants.
You're good, dude.
It's great.
You're good, dude. I knew our job would be easy in this episode because of that. Yeah, but then of course, Ripple Effect podcast, man.
And then it's on everything, Google Play, Spotify, everywhere. It's the rippleeffectpodcast.com is my my website, but you can find it anywhere you can find podcasts. I can't thank you guys enough for having me on.
Thank you,
I'm
man.
so glad to meet people who are starting podcasts and doing this and continue doing it. And who knows what these what it can turn into. And I'm sure there's plenty of people listening that you'd be very surprised. You're going to get listeners contacting you, and it's going to blow your mind, like how you're changing lives. So I'm so glad you guys are coming together. And with co-hosts, I mean, you guys, what episode are you guys on?
So this is number 8 right here.
Yeah.
Going strong.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
So, and it's with co-hosts. It gets hard because it's like all the scheduling and stuff. So it's cool to see you guys keep it together and you guys getting along and stuff. I've listened to some of your past shows. It's cool. And it's cool too because you get different personalities and different aspects to the show. So it's nice to see that. I against popular belief, I don't like doing solo podcasts and just ranting on by myself. I like talking to other people. It's fun to have people kind of just spark the conversation and bring up things you didn't think of or whatnot. So I think having 3 people on a show is awesome. I mean, that's one of the reasons I like doing those Union of the Unwanted shows is because you get so many different perspectives or whatnot. So so thanks a lot, guys. I really, really appreciate it. Keep up the great work.
We
I know
appreciate
it's
it.
probably impossible. Maybe one day I'll have you guys on the Union Unwanted if it works. I know it's at 7 o'clock my time.
We'll make it work if you ever feel inclined.
Yeah.
So.
Well, thanks again, guys. I really appreciate it.
Awesome.
Thank you, Ricky.
Ricky.
Yeah, have a great night, man.
Thanks. Have a great night.
All right.
Damn, that was badass having Ricky on.
Dude.
He's so awesome.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe the people he's interviewed.
Yeah.
Holy shit.
Yeah.
Jesse Ventura, Rick
Told ya.
Ross, dude, fucking A. And it's just us little guys, us little truthers.
I know.
Just us little guys on our little truth train.
Well, just chugging right along on the truth train, just coming out of our little shells, right? It's pretty cool.
Yeah, definitely.
Pretty awesome. We had this whole agenda typed up, and we didn't even get to any of
An
it,
agenda,
dude.
Scott?
Yeah. Oh, yes. This is Agenda 2020 on the freaking Truthzilla show. Yeah. But man, there's just so much going on. And it's just on a daily basis. I can't even keep up. We got into it a little bit earlier with Ricky, about just the mask mandate, and it's
that's today, man. And let's talk about that a little bit because I'm pretty heated today. Megan, I would like to hear how you're feeling about Miss Katie.
I'm so frustrated with Katie.
Don't hold back.
I'm trying to be careful not to say things that are going to get me in all kinds of trouble.
Yeah. It's getting to that point, huh? We're worried about the trouble.
I mean, and it's mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling. So her mandating the children 5 and over be masked starting Friday. Is that
starting
right?
today. No, she started today. That's a new thing she did.
Oh, just starting today.
Yeah, she every other one. She's gives you a couple days to let it sink in and be pissed off before it just starts happening. This one now, it's they're changing the rules. They're like, nope, I'm pissed. I'm having a bad day. Everybody fucking mask your kids now.
So, I mean, I'm not masking my kids.
No.
That's not going to happen. I wasn't going to mask my older, and it's not safe.
No.
It's not safe for them to be breathing their toxic carbon dioxide. It's not good for their, the blood toxicity. It's I guess what's super frustrating is that beyond it all, it's blowing my mind, the complete disregard for any democracy, the complete disregard for humanity, science, and it's such a blatant agenda, and it totally blows my mind. Everyone's just so thank you, Kate Brown, you're our governor, and I'm just what in the fuck are you?
Can you think about all these people that are pissed off sitting there oh my God, those 6-year-olds don't have their masks. I'm so in danger.
Man, up to this point, I see people walking around with their little kids outdoors. I keep going to the river. There's people with little kids down at the river, and their kids are masked in the water.
It's so sad.
They don't know what they're doing. And they're feeding into something that is taking all of us out. Yeah. So I don't know. I guess I don't have my words articulated well at this point. I'm so overwhelmed. It's so it's so quick. And Scott, you were saying last week, like they were going to do something and then
Yeah.
like give her 1 week.
That's
if
what
it
we were
gets-
saying. Yeah. So remember, if you go back to last week's episode, it was like, okay, we saw all these Oregonian news articles coming out
Yeah.
about how cases are going, and I even said on the record last week, I'm like, that means next week Kate Brown's going to come out with some bullshit agenda. Look what just happened. I will say it on air this time. Next Wednesday, what will that be? The 29th. We'll be on lockdown again here in Oregon.
Well, did you guys hear the end of her little speech today where she flat out in her little way threatened that there was going to be, she was letting us know in an underhanded way that this is just a little bit more pressure from the boot just to get you comfortable with the pressure from the boot, because next week we're going to lock your asses
Actually,
down to
I
your
take
homes.
that back. To follow the formula, next week it's going to be a bunch of Oregonian articles coming out saying that cases are continuing to rise. People are not abiding by the mask
people aren't.
mandates.
I was going to say people are
not abiding by the mask
Yep.
mandates. That's going to be next week, and so the following week will be
They'll
the
lock us
lockdown.
down.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's
Well, and
blowing
then
my
some of
mind.
the other things that she did again too that like went with this was the gyms now. Like my gym, you could go to the gym and you could work out without a mask, because as unsafe as a mask is already, how unsafe is it to wear a mask while
You're
you're heavy
panting and
breathing?
sweating.
Yeah, that's
While you're
insane.
heavy
dude.
breathing. That's totally
Well,
fucking insane.
and that was another part. I mean, this is much less of an issue than them trying to mask my kids. I will say that, because it's
Sure.
a personal. But okay, so we all know I was so super upset to lose like my amazing, wonderful gym just like a few weeks back, and then I finally got plugged into another gym like literally 2 to 3 days ago now, and it was amazing, and it was going to work out, and
all right.
now.
It's all right. We have doctor's notes from Dr. William Cooper from BPH.
Are we supposed to
Medical
say
Group.
that out loud, Scott?
Right? No, that's all right. We do. I mean, I have doctor's notes from Dr. William Cooper from BPH Medical Group, right? So
I
mean,
have one of those also.
You know, I am exempt.
yeah. Well,
But yeah, I mean, just the idea of it is, and it's not the masks. It's the oppression. It's not the mask this week. It's that they're not going to let my kids leave the house next week or the week after. And it's not that they're not going to let us leave our houses next week or the week after. They're going to stop us from traveling. They're going to stop my family from being able to go to the store and buy groceries. They're gonna stop all, like John Ziegler said, they can stop all relevant life.
Yeah, exactly. And another thing they did too is they cut all bars and restaurants back to 10 p.m. again.
Instead of 12 p.m.
Well,
it's
because
now
you
10.
can't,
so-
because you only catch COVID after 10 p.m. at bars.
Certainly.
The science is clear.
We know the science is so clear on this one. But directly, I have a second job that goes past 10 o'clock, and that's it's a small business that's struggling because of the new mandates. You're putting new mandates on. Again, this is all. It's small businesses are getting fucked.
Yeah.
And big business is just getting a boon out of this. They're just making.
That's part of their
hand
plan.
Over fist.
Part
Hand
of-
over fist.
yep.
They're doing
Yep.
better and better. They're just eating up all the scraps that they're cutting out.
Yeah,
And
if you guys don't see what's going on, this is the biggest wealth and power grab in the history of the human civilization.
Yeah, yeah.
That's what's going on. This is a consolidation of wealth and power. And we are going to be at the losing end of this. I mean, this is us.
We're
versus
already
them.
all losing.
Yeah, and it's just like, if you don't see this for what it is, you're insane. This is not about masks. This is not about a virus.
Yeah.
This is not about social distancing. This is not about which business can be open or not. This is strictly about.
It's not even about
globalist
social
authority-
justice. Yeah, it's not even social justice
Social
issues.
justice,
None of it.
Yeah, this is all about authoritarian globalist control.
Yeah.
And I made this point earlier. Like, it's just like, if I was smart, I would not be saying these things. I would not be saying these things
Yeah.
because as this plays out in the later stages of this, all of you that are going along with the masks and saying, oh yes, shaming us for wearing masks. You will all be safe. You will all be given a bed somewhere. You will be given 3 meals a day.
Maybe.
You will be kept alive.
Yeah,
Maybe.
maybe.
Vaccines.
But we will be dead. We will be killed.
Yeah.
That is where this is going. And if you think I'm wrong,
Look at history
Look at history. That's what is literally happening. It's happening again
before our eyes
Oh my
in real
God.
time. But it is a real fear, and it is a real reality, and.
Stop thinking that the government has your best interest in mind. Stop thinking that these health officials really care about your health. They do not. They are corrupt. They are gaining wealth and power from this.
Yes.
The government doesn't give a shit about you. They don't give a fuck about any one of you or your kids or your families. In fact, like the psychopathy thing, right? Or where he was talking about the power, the control, the psychopathy of it. Not only do they not care about you, but they get joy and pleasure out of seeing you suffer. If it was up to them, they enjoy murdering people. They love that type of shit. That's what this is all about. Like when we
Yes.
talk about the child trafficking and we talk about, the Luciferian ideology, the satanic ritual abuse, this is real. I don't think it's up for debate anymore whether or not this is real.
Right.
It also is symptomatic and emblematic of a global group of powerful people that get off on the death and torture of innocent people.
Yeah.
That's what this, they don't, not only do they not care about you, but they want to see you suffer and die and your whole family suffer and die. That's what this is.
Yeah. Or and the ones that are not suffering and dying only to serve them to their better ends and not to ours. Those that they want to keep, it's just like the whole population control thing. And they need some of us around. But not to treat you well, not to help you out with the vaccine, not to help you with this stimulus check. They're to make sure that you're just alive enough to serve them.
Well, and
that's
they
it.
do want less of us around.
For sure.
We do know that.
A lot less of us.
Useless eaters,
They
as they
especially
call us.
want like the three of us at this table to be less of us with our.
Well, and that's like the video you sent to us says it was Infowars,
Yeah.
but it was essentially it was the ritual of the mask.
Yep.
The whole
Yeah.
ritual. It was just it's breaking us down.
It's
It
a
is getting us
psychological warfare.
it's
That's
psychological
all that it
warfare.
is.
It's breaking us down to get us trained to be ready for the new normal. Is
Yeah,
what is their agenda.
The
It
new
already-
normal equals new world order, right?
Yeah.
That's the same words they've been using for a long time. In the video, I'll put a link in the notes here, but it's basically talking about how, how do you initiate someone into a cult? Saying they do the same thing in the military, right? When you need to make an obedient soldier. It's basically, number one, you isolate them from their family, loved ones, any sort of things like that, and so it makes them more susceptible. Then you strip them of their personal identity, and you make them appear as part of the group, right? In the military, they all wear the same uniforms, you shave their head, they all take on the same appearance, right? And then
This is even more diabolical because we're covering facial expressions.
Yeah.
Yep.
Facial
Yeah, yeah.
expressions, this is huge when it comes to kids because kids psychologically rely on visually what they see from their caregivers in expression. You can read and read and read on this topic.
Yeah.
Human beings in general and children in particular rely on facial expressions to understand how that they perceive and
dehumanize.
interact within their world.
Yep.
How to understand. That's how they learn empathy. I mean, it's just like even hearing impaired. There is so much behind the psychology and the
Such a good point.
psyop behind them masking us first, which we all said was going to happen. They were going to make an excuse to mask our kids, and now we're talking down to 5 years old. So we're talking. I've always spoken out against like public school indoctrination because this is just a complete bad government agenda within the public schools. But now we're talking about just a societal propaganda against our children. We're just indoctrinating them on they've conditioned people at this point to indoctrinate their children themselves based on the government's ideology of this false bullshit, and everyone's just like, I feel like everyone's just getting into the vat that they're gonna just like close the lid on and flush us away.
Yeah, it's insane, man. And then so like after that, after you dehumanized the people that you're trying to initiate into this new normal, right? Then it requires a traumatic event, and so basically you isolate them, dehumanize them, make them feel like part of the group, and then you traumatize them to create a sense of cognitive dissonance where they're now receptive to whatever it is you're trying to implant in their brain. Okay, that's how it is. This is you look it up in psychology textbooks. In fact, I will put links to like actual psychological studies that show this is what cults do. This is a practice that they use in the military.
Yep.
This is literally textbook stuff. Okay, so think about what's happened over the last few months. We've been isolated. Okay, we've been dehumanized. We've been put masked to lose our identity and become part of the group. And now we're preparing for a traumatic event. Now it could be argued that either what we've experienced now this is the traumatic event, or there's going to be some sort of traumatic event.
This is part of it
I'm
for
rooting
sure.
for Operation
Sure.
Bluebeam. I'm rooting for the aliens, dude. That's what I'm hoping for. Okay, but if not, expect some sort of traumatizing event that's going to be the nail in the coffin on this thing, and it's going to
How
get
they're going to
everybody.
justify lockdown.
Yeah, because everybody's already in that state of cognitive dissonance right now,
Justify
where they're
it.
just waiting for the government to come in and save the day, and that's what they've been talking. I mean, that's when you talk, Warner von Braun's deathbed confessions. You go back, anybody that's talked about the New World Order, that's what it's going to be. Is when you've got a subjugated population that's willing to just lay back and say, "Yes, government, please save me from whatever it is you've told me to be fearful of."
Yes.
And that's what's coming.
Yep.
God. So I don't know. Like we had this whole list of notes to talk to Ricky about, and I've been trying to get into this topic for weeks now, but we haven't. We just keep all this other cool shit comes up that we talk about, and it's just been, and I love that. But
Totally.
I'm sure some of you
But
out
it's
there,
time.
The world's crazy enough that like you can't stop talking about what's right in front of your face, but this is in front of our face too.
yeah, it's like some of you out there are probably like, why the hell are these guys talking about Maxwell and Epstein? Well, we're gonna do a little bit tonight, just for the hell of it. And I really wanted to get into it with Ricky because he just had Whitney Webb and Ryan Christian on.
If you haven't listened to that, please go back and listen to them. It's amazing.
Excellent.
Yeah, so if you're looking for a good Ripple Effect podcast episode to start with, definitely start there. Whitney was also on Tim Dillon's show recently. If you guys haven't listened to the Tim Dillon show, God, it's
He's hilarious.
He's woke as fuck, dude. He he's good because he knows like dates, names of all the stuff, like all the conspiracies, man. He knows, but he's just like he's a comedian, right? So he's hilarious. But he goes into this stuff too, and he's impressive with how much knowledge he has about it. But like, on his Patreon episodes, he'll make like a Johnny Gosh joke, and I'm just like shaking my head like, God damn it, Tim, like you fucking, you know what I mean? But then again, like you wouldn't know what he's talking about unless like unless you're on the level, as they say. But anyway, so God, Ghislaine Maxwell, right? So almost a year to the date since Epstein was arrested, right? So she was. God, what was it? The 2nd, 3rd, 4th, something like that. She was arrested June 4th, and I think when Epstein or July. God, I don't know. Anyway, July. Yeah, that's what it was. That's what. It was. So like 4th of July weekend, basically, she was arrested, and then Epstein was July 6, 2019. Right? He lasted about a year or about a month. And I get a lot of this from the Whitney Webb, her investigation of it. And we'll again put another link in the notes here. And I was really hoping to pick Ricky's brain on it and see what he kind of extracted from it. But man, she goes hard, dude. And I just love how like she ties into intelligence agencies. I mean, that's really what this has come to the surface to be. Is the whole Maxwell family is literally just embedded in global intelligence agencies, specifically like Israel, Israeli intelligence. It's crazy, man.
Yeah.
One of the things that I really wanted to pick apart was the whole Epstein-Gates connection, right? Because Epstein is dark into so much more than what like even the media would tell you. And so like one of the things that really stood out to me was right. I'm sure some of you guys saw Filthy Rich on Netflix, the Epstein documentary that it's worth watching. It's worth watching. I would say. You get a lot of interviews from like, the actual women who were victims, right? You get a lot of, inside scoops about what it was like. There's actually interview footage of Epstein. You can just see what a little fucking arrogant prick he is, dude. I'd never even seen him talk before. Like I've been talking to Epstein for a year now. I've never even seen the guy talk before. So that was kind of interesting. Some like filmed, like I don't know, like in some interrogation room type stuff. It's just like this guy. But, he also had this whole other thing at his Zorro Ranch in New Mexico, like literally breeding women, right? And that's where he's got all these connections to, people in the tech community, people in the science community, because he was one of these, looking for the post-human civilization, which is one of the main like Luciferian tenets, right? To create like a post-human breakaway civilization that emerged with machines to attain immortality, basically, is one of the tenets. And so, when you're that rich and powerful, you don't want to die, you want to attain immortality, you're gonna go to all these lengths, right? And so he was way into like genetic engineering, and diving in all these like medical researchers. Definitely crossed paths with Epstein, and there's a whole bunch of like ties that you can connect those two. Gates is on record saying that he never had any dealings with Epstein prior to 2011, right?
I remember one of the Whitney Webb, I think it was a Tim Dillon Whitney Webb, one of the older ones I listened to. She had interviewed one of the victims of Epstein, and she had said that Bill Gates would come over there and spend hours talking with Epstein.
Yeah.
It spent hours. And I think this was earlier, probably like late 90s, if I can remember correctly, when they spent a lot of time together. But that's totally a blatant lie. And Bill Gates is totally, they share similar views of the world.
Totally. Absolutely. Absolutely. So one of the smoking guns is that Whitney points out is that the whole Maxwell family, dude, I think there's 7 siblings, or Ghislaine had 7 siblings, somewhere in there. They're all the sons and daughters of a guy named Robert Maxwell. Robert Maxwell, may have heard of him, may not. He was
he's quite a guy.
He was a rich, powerful man, had all these companies, also ties to intelligence. He was kind of Israeli intelligence. He was tapped on the shoulder to kind of promote the software that Israel had created to corporations, governments all over the world that actually had a backdoor in it that allowed the Israeli intelligence to access whatever files and databases were on the computers that the software was installed in. So he was caught up in that. And it was found like him and a senator, some senator that was trying to sell it with him.
Towers or something?
Yeah, Senator Towers, right? So they after all this came to light, they were both dead within a few weeks of each other after that, right? So just textbook stuff. So the Maxwell kids kind of just come in and they kind of try to take over the father's businesses, right? And a couple of them was Isabel and Christine.
The twin sisters.
Yeah, they came together and took control of something called the McKinley Group. The McKinley Group, which Ghislaine was invested in, right? She had money invested in it. And this was back in 1995. So what they did is they created a search engine. Back there was all kind of... I was funny looking into this. All the old search engines like Ask Jeeves and InfoSeek. And I was like, oh, yeah, I remember those websites, right?
Yeah.
The pre-Google days and all that. One of them was called Magellan. And so the McKinley Group was the company that manufactured the Magellan software, which actually was bought out and purchased and incorporated into MSN, and which is the Microsoft network, right? So when you see MSNBC, another side note here, if you get your news from MSNBC, just remember that MS in MSNBC stands for Microsoft. And so when they're saying all this pro-vaccine, pro-Bill Gates shit, just remember where you're hearing it from, okay?
Right, yep.
MSNBC, Microsoft Network, okay? So in 1995, MSN incorporated Magellan database search software into their infrastructure. So that gives you a direct tie for the Maxwell family to Bill Gates at that time. Now, if you look at what Maxwell is actually being charged with right now, she is being charged with conspiracy to entice minors to travel to engage in illegal sex acts. Okay?
Wow.
And the charges are for the years of 1994 to 1997.
Yeah.
Okay? Which aligns exactly at the time. So what it's saying is that...
So we're going to ignore the other hundreds and hundreds
right
hundreds.
Now, and I've heard that they're doing that on purpose to kind of... I guess that time period was when she was not necessarily associated with Prince Andrew. And so that's one of the arguments is that they're trying to divert. And Alan Dershowitz. So those are the people that were not involved. Our good buddy Alan, buddy, Mr. Stick a Needle in Your Arm, Dershowitz.
Pull you
Grab
from
him
your
by the-
house
Yeah,
and
grab
stick
you,
a needle in your arm. Yeah.
Yep. So that's the argument there is that they've only contained her charges to that period of time to kind of keep other people out of the crossfire, right? But okay, so
That sounds like justice.
yeah. So
That sounds like justice.
1994.
Just pick some years. She's been good the other
Sorry.
years.
Yeah.
She's
But
97 on.
She isn't good the other years, though, is the thing. She's a monster through and through
she's
for all the
totally-
years, and
totally.
much more so than just transporting and enticing these minors.
Yeah, the charges
she was
in
sexually
and of
involved,
themselves, she's
directly,
bullshit.
physically involved, as if delivering the children up to the monster's doorstep wasn't
She
bad
was
enough. But
sharing
she
the women.
absolutely
She was sharing them too.
100%. Yes, she was.
Yeah, she was totally in on the whole operation. I
Yep.
mean, people have said that she's worse in a lot of ways. But I think the charges make me think, and I think that just listening to Whitney Webb a lot too. But it's just like that. This is just all a front to fucking flush this shit out. So the people
Trying to make
that
it look like they did something.
Well, so we'll get her on these things. So everybody else that she could really indict and get in trouble, we'll get a free pass, and we'll just sweep this under the rug.
Yeah.
I think that's what it looks like to me. I mean, obviously they could have had worse charges, and why the hell the window? The window is so ridiculous.
So ask
Yeah,
yourself,
it's just
why
blatant.
is that? Why?
Yep.
Yeah, blatant. So why is that? And once you don't have a sufficient answer to that question, you have to question every other single thing that comes after that. This is not just, and this isn't truth coming to light either. This is another cover up under the guise of we're bringing some justice to
and let's
to
not
light. That's
forget that
happening.
Epstein had gotten in trouble a decade before in Florida, and I mean he got a complete slap on the wrist.
Decade
What was it?
before now, yeah.
But it was a year and a half of house arrest or
Yeah,
something he did
basically,
like that, which
he was,
which from what
weekend-
I heard he was not even house arrest at all. Anyways,
Yeah.
he was doing whatever the fuck he wanted. Let's be
Yeah.
real
Let's
clear.
be
Whatever he
real
wanted.
clear.
And so really, I just like to point out this smoking gun, really. So she is allegedly, transported minors for the purposes of sex at the same time that she was involved in business dealings with Bill Gates. So I'm just going to leave it right there. There's other weird things to look into too. Like she was involved in a kids charity fund. This organization called the Mirror, like you were saying.
Seems
Well, pedophiles always get involved with
Disney Day
children's
Out.
issues.
Disney Day Out back in September
Disney,
13th,
what a
1985.
surprise.
Yep, the dark world of Disney. And so another real interesting thing to observe is that the Filthy Rich Netflix documentary, if you look, it was produced by James Patterson, the acclaimed author, the Alex Cross series, right?
Yeah.
James Patterson also co-authored a book called The President is Missing with, who's his co-author?
Bill Clinton.
Okay, so that's it right there. So James Patterson is in cahoots with Bill Clinton and that whole network, and so produced the whitewash documentary of the whole Epstein fiasco. So, as they call it, it's a limited hangout, right? We're going to give you this much information to make you think that we did our due diligence in researching the entire thing. And then you say, oh, okay, that's great, case closed. I guess I can go to sleep at night now, knowing that all the bad guys have been taken care of and everything's it's
right
all
in the
done and
world
over
again.
with. When in fact, it's so much bigger. And as Tripoli always says, like Epstein was just a district manager, dude.
Totally.
Like he ain't shit. He reported to people. Who did he report to?
Wexner.
He reported, absolutely. And he reported, the whole Maxwell family. Look into all their ties to Unit 8200, all the ties to Israeli intelligence, man. And it's deep, deep, deep.
Yep.
So. Yeah, so I don't know if we're taking predictions. I don't think they have the. I mean, I take that back. I know they have the balls to take her out while she's locked up. No questions about it.
I was kind of surprised though, because I thought they might just bail her out on the charges she had. I was kind of surprised
I'm
that
kind of waiting for it to go that way a little bit too. There's obviously they're biding time for something. They won't bide too much time.
Yeah, but I think
there's already a plan.
Well,
in place.
the trial's not for a year.
Yeah, they pushed
trial's
the
not
trial
She'll
until
never make it.
July.
She'll
next
never
year.
make it till next July.
Yeah.
She said she's worried. Like, we
Of
don't.
course, but she probably has the inside track. One of the things that's telling me that they're just messing with us with this whole thing is if you look at the indictment, it's the indictment number is CR 20330. So it's like literally they got the 33 in the title of the indictment number, and so it's just like, oh, actually they're just messing with us.
Yeah.
So
And no mugshot.
no mugshots.
Yeah, no mugshot. That was
so the whole thing is shady, shifty. I don't trust it.
And they act like they couldn't find her this last year. Like,
Yeah,
exactly.
So
So
where's
do we
she
even
been?
think? Do we really think they have her?
I mean, who knows?
Maybe
Really,
they don't
really.
have her, and they say they pulled. That's why they're doing these lenient.
Is
these
Epstein
really,
dead? I mean, there's a lot we don't know.
Even
I
think
don't
Epstein's
think
dead.
so.
I don't think Epstein's dead.
I don't think so.
Yeah. There was a 4chan report, or I think it was 4chan. Like somebody was saying, "Hey guys, I don't know. This is way before the news even broke. You can look into this too. Like some guy was posting on 4chan saying, "Hey, I work at the jail where Epstein's at, and like all these military dudes just came in. They just took him out of here. Like, and this is like early in the morning before the news even broke. And it's just like."
And
okay.
who reminded me who performed his autopsy?
Oh yeah, Michael Baden, our
And
friend Michael
and
Baden.
he also has performed the autopsies on who?
Oh yeah, he also did the autopsies on JFK,
Okay.
Martin Luther King
All right.
Damn.
Jr. He testified in the OJ trial.
There you go.
And you ready? George Floyd.
That's it.
Oh
Okay.
shit.
Yeah.
All right. So no corruption
Damn.
there. No
There's no
no
corruption.
suspicion of corruption.
Not at
Let's
all.
call in our
It's
best
just-
guy.
It's just the only guy that was autopsied and involved in every single assassination and cover up in the history of the United States.
Why would that be?
Why would that be suspicious? I mean, I don't know. Interesting. Michael Baden, look it up. God, yes. Okay, I got my.
But
fix.
don't forget to
Should-
get in line for that vaccine, guys.
Yeah.
Should we also though touch? I mean, I feel like it's hard to touch on this right now without the whole douche bank. Whatever.
Deutsche Bank.
The Deutsche Bank. I call it
Okay, yeah, fair
douche.
enough.
I call it
That's all right.
douche bank.
All right.
Yeah, that works
And
too.
the judge's husband and son getting shot.
Yeah.
I mean, that's pretty. I mean, that's all
Okay.
tied into this too.
That was blowing my freaking mind.
Yeah, so for all you coincidence theorists out there, right? So a judge's family gets targeted for obviously what was a hit, whether it was related to something involving Deutsche Bank or something involving. So if you
but
don't know-
it's an Epstein
well,
issue.
it
There's
is.
a
it
whole
is.
trail
And so
behind it,
basically,
too.
the Deutsche Bank is being sued because they
I thought-
failed to do their due diligence in
yeah.
around the Epstein thing. So it is an Epstein related thing, but
The shareholders are suing.
Yeah, and so it's like whether she was specifically targeted, whether she was the target, if the family was the target, and whether it was stuff involving Epstein and what information would come to light with that, or if it is Deutsche Bank trying to cover up something, that's yet to be seen. But obviously, this is.
But the shooter himself was
Yeah.
pretty. corrupt, known
Yeah.
guy himself too.
Yeah, the alleged shooter, and
The-
I love
well,
how this. You see this a lot. You see this a lot where it's case closed, right? Okay, this is they.
There's no way they couldn't have possibly even collected fingerprints and had them analyzed overnight.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen. Much
Yeah.
less conclude that he was for sure the shooter and have come to a shut case by the next day. That
And he
doesn't
committed
happen.
suicide
Everybody
conveniently,
listening to this has seen CSI. Everyone knows it's not logically that's not how it works.
Yeah.
There's no way they would still, especially in a murder case, two murders from a federal court judge.
Yeah.
They still have that place taped off. They were still collecting evidence.
Yeah.
I mean, they probably weren't because they know who did it. But my point is that timeline makes absolutely zero sense. It should just.
And of course, he died by suicide, of course, too. So that just tells you everything you need to know. And I smell.
Yeah.
I want to take this opportunity to say I didn't kill myself in the future, guys.
I did not.
Swear to God, I would never kill myself.
I
you
will
guys.
never commit suicide.
No.
I
No,
love
no,
my
no.
life.
I love my life. Yeah, but if they're going after judges, dude, like
I thought the case was the shareholders against the bank because the
Yeah,
bank
yeah.
and it was a judge in that. But yeah, that the guy that supposedly we think the shooter is a total Israeli.
they're telling us who the shooter is.
Okay.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
told us that it was for sure
Okay,
by the
so
next day for sure.
It's
him.
all we're figuring
knows,
it out.
man?
You know,
It's all happening in real time.
It's all crazy. That's
it's,
for sure.
It's just so frustrating. So anyway,
I suppose the Clintons know who they hired.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Dude, we need to get Hillary Clinton on here, dude.
Dude, that would be
love to get that.
awesome.
If anybody have like ties to Hillary Clinton, maybe
Skype though, I don't want her in the same
I
room.
was gonna say I don't want that evil energy like.
I don't know though. I have
Yeah.
children. I don't think that's a good idea.
Right.
Damn. All right. What a freaking. Speaking of before and after, this is a real before and after episode, guys. Hell yeah, that was
yeah.
awesome. Megan, you want to take us out?
Absolutely. Well, thank you again to Ricky Varandas for joining us. It was absolutely amazing of the Ripple Effect podcast. I am sitting here with Scott and Ed. I am Megan. We wish you all intellectual prosperity. Good night.
Bam.
Bam.